It's Tuesday morning. You pack your daughter's lunch, ham and rye. She likes the crusts cut off. You kiss your wife. She smells like lavender. You've memorized that detail, the way you've memorized everything. Not out of love, out of discipline. Your neighbor waves from his driveway. You wave back. You have lived in this house for 6 years. You know every crack in the ceiling, every neighbor's schedule, every shortcut to the university where you teach economics. You are, by every observable measure, exactly who you appear to be. You are not. The KGB does not recruit the desperate. They find the disciplined, the ideological, the ones who believe, not because someone told them to, but because they worked it out themselves. In 1961, you were not the loudest person in the room. That is exactly why they noticed you. A man named Volkov takes you to lunch, twice, before he says what he actually wants. He doesn't ask if you're willing to serve the Soviet state. He asks if you understand what the West is doing to it. You do, or you think you do. At 23, certainty is easy. 2 years from now, he says, that will be where you live. You don't ask what happens after 2 years. That's the first test. You pass it by staying quiet. For 14 months, you stop being yourself. Not metaphorically, literally. You are given a name, David Caldwell, born Cleveland, 1938. Father, machinist, mother, schoolteacher, both deceased, no siblings. You study David Caldwell the way a surgeon studies anatomy. His childhood, his vowels, his opinions about baseball. He followed the Cleveland Indians, which explains the hat you will wear for the next 12 years. Your instructors are former émigrés, people who lived in America for decades and came back. When they speak to you, they use Ohio slang. They correct you when you say autumn instead of fall. You learn tradecraft, surveillance detection, dead drops, how to use a person's loneliness against them without them noticing it's happening. You also learn something they don't write in the manuals: how to stop reacting. Your handlers show you things, photographs of villages, reports from Hungary, and watch your face. They're not looking for emotion. They're looking for the absence of it. By month 12, you pass. The customs officer looks at your passport for 11 seconds. You count it. You will always count things like this. He stamps it. Welcome home, Mr. Caldwell. Good to be back, you say. You have never been here before. Your cover is real in every way that can be checked. A lecturing position at Carnegie Mellon, junior economics. Credentials backdated through West German academic contacts. Publications, conference appearances. A history that exists if you go looking for it. In the first 6 months, you do nothing operational. This is deliberate. You live. You shop at the same grocery store every week. You learn which neighbors talk and which don't. You go to church, not because you believe in what it represents, but because David Caldwell would. You are building a life that doesn't exist until it does. And there is a specific moment, a Tuesday afternoon in February, walking home from campus through light snow, where you notice something unsettling. You are comfortable. That is not a good sign. By 1967, you have 4 assets. None of them know they are assets. You don't ask people for secrets. You build relationships, patient, slow, genuine seeming until information arrives on its own. A comment at dinner about a new propulsion contract, a document left on a desk that you photograph in 30 seconds while your contact refills his glass. Your handler contacts you only through dead drops in Frick Park. You receive acknowledgement via a radio frequency at 11 p.m. every third Thursday. Numbers. You decode them on a pad you burn in your kitchen sink. In 1968, the numbers include a promotion. You are now what the KGB calls an illegal resident, not a spy, the foundation the spies run through. If any one of your assets breaks, the chain stops at your name. David Caldwell, a man who doesn't exist, who is now responsible for people who don't know they're in danger. They didn't plan this. Neither did you. Her name is Catherine. She teaches literature. She argues about Dostoevsky like it matters and somehow makes you believe it does. Your handler does not object to the marriage. He encourages it. A married American academic with a mortgage is significantly less suspicious than a solitary foreign-born lecturer with no local ties. You understand this. You tell yourself you understand this in a way that lets you go through with it. In 1971, your daughter is born. You name her Anna, not because it's Soviet, because Catherine liked it. That distinction starts to matter more than it should. In 1974, your handler gives you a name, a senior analyst at the Defense Intelligence Agency. He has access to NATO's nuclear positioning strategy for Western Europe. What he knows would give Moscow a significant tactical advantage over Allied command. Your instructions are precise. Get close, build trust, extract. You've done this before. This is different. Because you know this man. He came to Anna's 3rd birthday. He taught Catherine's book club how to make pierogi. He once drove you to the hospital at 2 a.m. when you thought Anna had broken her wrist. You sit in your car outside his house for 40 minutes. Then you go in. The mission succeeded, or you thought it did. In 1976, a KGB officer defects in Helsinki. His debriefing takes 9 months. During those 9 months, he names a man inside KGB Foreign Intelligence, a man who has been feeding operational intelligence to the CIA since 1963. The man's name is Volkov, the man who recruited you, the man who handed you a photograph across a lunch table in Moscow and said 2 years from now, that will be where you live. For 13 years, every asset you ran, every dead drop you serviced, every document you photographed, Volkov reported it to Langley in advance. You were never a KGB operation. You were a CIA operation that didn't know it was a CIA operation. The DIA analyst's intelligence never reached Moscow. It reached Virginia. Somewhere, someone in Langley knows your real name, not David Caldwell. They've known it since 1963. You never told Catherine. You never told Anna. Some mornings you still count the seconds at passport control. Force of habit, force of training, force of something you can no longer clearly name. The question is not whether you were a spy. The question is, for 13 years of your life, whose spy were you? And the harder question, does it change anything about what you did? The man who ran Volkov's network didn't work for Moscow. He worked for Langley, and nobody, not even the assets, ever knew. If you had been David Caldwell and you found out on a Tuesday afternoon 30 years later, what would you have done with that? Let me know below.